Welcome to Hence the Future podcast. I'm Mattimore Cronin,
And I'm Justin Clark.
and today we're discussing the future of aviation. And today I want to get right into the meat of the discussion, which is how aviation is going to change in the future. And to that end, I want to open it up with a quote from a pilot. The pilot's name is Adam Webster, and he says, "It is a fairly unpopular notion to suggest to pilots that their days are numbered as meaningful participants in the actual flying of the machine. Even my own pilot ego gets a little confused at the notion that there isn't much need for me, but the stark reality is that pilots are increasingly monitors of systems." So, what are your thoughts on the role of pilots as monitors of systems, and would you be willing to fly in a plane that was fully automated?
Yeah, right now planes are mostly automated. The pilot really as far as I'm aware, the pilot is mostly doing something during takeoff and landing. The bulk of the flight while it's in the air and navigating to the final destination is pretty much all autopilot.
Right. And
So
I've even heard that a lot of the takeoff and landing is done autonomously now, that really it's the taxiing part, like, driving on ground to the appropriate gate, that's
yeah.
actually the main part that's, totally manual. Everything else is like monitoring of systems.
Yeah, and I don't want to discount the monitoring of systems because that's one of those things where you don't, even if the plane messes up like 0.001% of the time, that's extremely catastrophic.
Yeah.
So it's important, especially now, to have the monitors. But long term, as AI gets better and better, I would be fairly confident saying that the monitors are, you know, probably going to be out of a job eventually, like that pilot in the quote
Yeah.
you mentioned.
I mean, airline safety has gotten so much better over the years. Like, for instance, in the year 1970, there were almost 2,400 people who died in that year alone from airplane
Wow.
crashes worldwide. And the number in 2017 is like 20 people or 40 people. I can't see, it's in
Yeah.
increments of 500, but it's very small, a very small number of people who die. So even like the Air Max, plane that went down recently and
Mhm.
everyone was horrified. The fact that we were horrified because it was such an unexpected event for a plane to go down just shows how rare these collisions are. And
Yeah.
just to put some numbers to it, airplane crashes are 200 times less common than automobile crashes. So if you're worried
Yeah.
about dying in a plane flight, you should be way more worried about dying in your car.
Mhm.
And the actual odds, according to The Economist, of you dying in your next flight is about 1 in 5.4 million.
Wow.
So it's pretty low odds that you'll die.
Yeah, no, that's actually that's something that I've kind of been aware of. If anyone's ever afraid of flying, you just hear like, oh yeah, planes are safer than cars, but having a number on it really drives that point home.
Yeah, totally. Well, anyways, I think the next topic that we should talk about is specifically commercial air travel, because
Uh-huh.
that's something everyone, probably all of our listeners, are familiar with, and we should think about how we foresee that changing and evolving going forward, even
Hmm.
beyond pilotless planes.
Okay.
So, I guess, how do you envision the whole experience changing going forward?
Yeah, so this is it kind of starts from the airport, in my opinion, because if you're flying private, that kind of you don't really have to deal with airports. But with a commercial airline, you go through the airport, check-in process, the security lines, and all of this seems archaic to me. Every time I go
Yeah,
to an airport, I'm just frustrated out of my mind because I'm sitting in security for, several, well, seemingly hours, but it's, I don't know, 30 to 45 minutes. I always think that that can be improved. And I think as AI and image recognition gets better and better, and maybe even scanners get better and better. All that needs to happen is anyone who walks through the door of an airport is just scanned, and that's your security, is walking through the door of the airport.
Oh
And
yeah.
there's probably even going to be some sort of um, security system that's monitoring everybody all the time in the airport. So there's no way to get past it. I just think right now the fact that we have this huge bottleneck of security and you have to get to the airport, you know, this many hours before your flight actually leaves is just kind of
Yeah,
frustrating and a waste of
it's
time.
idiotic. I mean, the only reason they have you check in is so if you don't check in, they can give your seat to someone else, basically. And I guess that gives them time to do a security check on you, but it
Yeah.
does seem totally needless point of friction. And I
Uh,
don't know, did you see the tweet that I shared on the Hence the Future Twitter about the Chinese airport security system?
I don't think so. No. What was it?
So, anyways, there's this American reporter who, covers China technology, and he's in this airport in
Hmm.
China, and he just goes right up to the screen, where you see like, where your flight is it on time,
Hmm.
and this immediately recognizes his face and gives him the actual path to his next flight and all the information. So he doesn't have to like search through a bunch of rows to find
Oh.
his information. It just recognizes him and then it shows him the information that's exactly specific to him. And notice that he did not input his information at any point. He never scanned his face for the Chinese government. He's not even a Chinese citizen, but they have this data on him. And
Wow.
yeah,
That's kind
they're
of scary, but kind of awesome.
right. I mean, that's why the tweet was impressive or terrifying was the
Yeah.
the message, but yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of things like that. And as someone who travels a lot for work and for personal,
Mhm.
I envision a situation where you don't have to check in. I think that's totally archaic,
Yeah.
like you said. You get to the airport. I mean, I'm a Clear member, which,
Hmm.
for those that don't know, this is a new system that TSA implemented to some of their bigger airports where all you do is you scan some of your biometric data. So, either it's two of your forefingers, your thumb, could
Yep.
scan your retina, it can do a facial recognition, and then they just take you right to the front of security. You don't have to wait in line at all. And then
Yep.
your baggage goes through. You don't have to take off your shoes. You don't have to take out your toiletries. You don't have to take out your laptop. It just goes into this because the likelihood of you doing something bad based on their analysis is very low.
Hmm.
And then you proceed to your gate. And, the boarding a plane process is also very stressful. So, one innovation that I saw that was really interesting was actually a patent by Boeing which is for compartments that actually load into the plane. So imagine that while you're waiting at the gate, you actually get in the seat that you're going to sit in during the flight. And then whenever the plane is ready, it just lowers that entire pod into the airplane. So you don't have to like spend any time, getting seated. There's always like the
Huh.
shuffle for baggage. It's basically like you can prepare everything in advance before the plane is even ready. So right when the plane gets there, they remove the capsule that has all like the dirty seats and the people
Hmm.
from the previous flight and they load in the new capsule, and this would revolutionize the amount of time it takes for turnaround for these flights.
Wow, I've never heard of that. That's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
it doesn't
And
exist yet, but the patent has been
yeah, yeah,
filed.
yeah.
Yeah,
I think any sort of improvements on the logistics is only going to improve as technology gets better. Like as the capabilities of robots, I'm sure there's going to be some sort of robotic arm that, loads this in. Like as all of the manufacturing and everything um, catches up to speed with these ideas, then I think we're going to see these really awesome innovations. The other thing that you mentioned with the guy who got in China who got the path to his final destination,
hmm
that kind of makes me think of how the layout of the airports themselves can be optimized.
Oh,
Um,
totally. I
yeah, I
mean,
mean,
San
there's
Francisco Airport is eons better than LAX Airport as far as how it's designed.
uh,
I mean, the amount of
yeah,
time it takes to get you a lift is like 5x at LAX as it is at
Mm.
SFO.
Yeah, so one thing I've been interested in recently is how architecture designed by humans is like square, like kind of boxy and
Mm,
doesn't have this fluid sort of design. And when AI creates designs or architectures or buildings, um, and it has kind of free reign over the path and the layout. They build in a lot of redundancy, or these algorithms build in a lot of redundancy, which is actually something we see in nature a lot.
hmm.
So if you see how ants, they take a path to some giant food source. There's a lot of different paths and a lot of redundancy in their paths. But the nice thing about that is you can cut from one place to the opposite side of the airport, for example, without having to walk around everything. Whereas
Right,
most
right.
airports, you have to, like, if you want to turn around and go somewhere totally different, you have to just go back the exact same way that you came in. And, that
Oh
takes a lot
yeah.
of walking time.
I mean,
So,
yeah, oftentimes it seems like the ways that humans design things is like if you were to design something on the back of a napkin with just the least cognitive load, like, oh
uh-huh.
yeah, let's design seats. Let's just create them, all parallel, squished together, one after the other, and you can only
Mm.
push your seat back 2 inches, and
Yeah.
and the seats are like just basically a cardboard, like up and down. There's like no ergonomics considered whatsoever. I mean,
Mm.
it's pretty terrible the way. I mean, obviously, it's amazing that we can fly at all. So,
Yeah.
thank you to the Wright brothers. But yeah, I mean, I've seen some concepts that definitely going to be sharing on our Instagram, which show a completely different type of in-flight experience. Like,
Mm.
imagine if instead of having a bunch of seats squished together one after another, you had pods. And this sounds something like more like what an AI system
Mm.
would design. So if you
Yeah.
have these pods where you're in your own personal area, you have
Mm.
some semblance of privacy if you want to sleep and not have a bunch of light from the person next to you and noise from the baby in front of you. You've got your own little area, and you can have pods sort of like on different planes where they're not all on the same level, so you could fit more of them in there. Maybe you just keep your
Yeah.
luggage like next to you in case you need it. um,
Mm.
and obviously, once you get into the luxury like private jets, you can create the most phenomenal experiences ever. But that's
Yeah.
only accessible to very few people, so I don't think it makes sense for us to linger
Yeah.
much on that.
Mm. But so, I mean, they kind of have that right now, and it's just called first class. So,
Yeah, but I mean, it's much more boring than these concepts that,
oh yeah,
yeah,
definitely. And I think that probably the reason they do that now is just because, they're trying to fit in the maximum amount of people that they can get into the plane, which I guess makes sense from a business perspective because they need something to keep the lights on. Because I know, running an airline is one of the least profitable things anybody can do. I think it's a super unprofitable industry, so they're like barely breaking even. So I'm sure they have to break or they have to do everything they can to get the most amount of people on the
yeah.
planes.
Well, I mean, what's interesting is that you're right that it is really hard to make a profit in moving people from point A to point B via air travel. But
Hmm.
apparently, the freight industry is just has unbridled demand. Like there is so much
Okay.
demand to take packages all over the country that these
Mm.
mega planes of UPS or whatever
Yep.
are just they can't make enough of them and they can't have enough flights because there's so much demand. But with
Wow.
passenger jets, people are a lot more fickle, they're a lot more price conscious,
Hmm.
and so, small and medium-sized planes tend to dominate for commercial air travel because they want to fill every single seat.
Yeah. Hmm. And I mean, also with cargo, you can stack it vertically. Like with humans, we
Right.
can't be packed in there like sardines, as much as it feels like we are sometimes. It's not we're not being, laid on top of one another, which makes it
Right,
a little
right.
better.
Yeah.
Have you seen those concepts for planes that um, extend the body of the plane and the seating area of the plane kind of into the wings? So it's
No, I
almost
haven't
like
seen that.
there's sort of a fluid um, design from the main capsule to the wings, so people are actually
Mm.
sitting on the wings.
Wow.
So maybe there are five, six, seven, or maybe even 10 rows of, or groups of rows. So total maybe 20 or 30 rows of people. Or
Wow.
sorry, I guess
You mean
columns.
horizontally
Yeah,
across?
horizontally.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's how many would be in each row. Would be 20 per row.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
so it's a super wide. We should probably. I'll find an image of this so we
Yeah,
can
send
share
that
it.
to me. Yeah.
But I think that might be another way that we can improve the capacity and but also the space per person, and that might be a perfect area to um, do these capsules that you were talking about. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean the boarding process is key because that's a big area of frustration. I mean, if you haven't seen the Key and Peele sketch about that, it's absolutely hilarious. It's basically like he's like, "Oh, nice, I'm in group 1." And then they're like, "All right, pre-boarding, pre-boarding. Okay, children, military, first class, second class, mileage plus." And it's like all these different things and then finally they call group 1, and it has become this just weird status game where like everyone just pays like nickels and dimes to get to the higher level up, and it's like a mini feudal kingdom within every flight. So by having people already ready to load, that would
uh,
eliminate a lot of that, but that might be to the airline's disadvantage because price discrimination is big business.
mm,
And so basically, if for those who don't know, airlines charge different prices for different people all the time. So you're not always getting the same price as someone else would get, depending on your purchase history. If they know you're a big spender, if they know you buy upgrades, then they might give you a better price. If you're someone who's like a total cheapskate and just gets the minimum of everything, they might give you a slightly higher price. Um, and so one tip that I'll give our listeners is whatever price you're getting, like open up an incognito window and see if the price is any different there. And this
yeah,
is
because they
especially
save cookies. They save
exactly,
cookies on you. Yeah.
or just clear your cache.
Yeah.
But it can also work to your advantage if you do tend to get upgrades. So it's worth checking both, in my opinion. But price discrimination could get a lot more extreme going forward simply because airlines are going to have so much more information about each person.
Yeah.
Um,
So what I'm curious to know also, like with the future of airplanes, what do you think about different energy sources like electric
yeah,
planes
yeah,
or you know anything beyond that? If there's nuclear planes that would somehow be safe, that's potentially an option too. But um,
right. Yeah, I'm not sure I would sign up for that nuclear planes right just yet. But anyways, yeah. So electric planes do exist today. You can fly on an electric plane, and it'll be a great experience, I'm sure. The caveat is that it's a very small plane. 2 people, maybe 4 people can fit in it. And the reason why it must be so small is because just due to physics,
mhm.
every time you double the size, or sorry, anytime you double the mass of an airplane, the fuel requirements go up by like 8x. Um, so, and the
Mm,
problem is that in order to double that capacity with electric energy, you need to, 8x the size of the battery, and batteries are really heavy. So it
yeah.
actually ends up being a lot worse than just having a smaller plane because you need these super heavy batteries. And that's okay if you're
Mhm.
using fossil fuels because fossil fuels are really powerful, pound for pound.
Right.
But one thing that I did think was really smart is there are some concepts now, and I think some actual versions of hybrid planes. So these are planes that
Okay.
use electric energy and they use fossil fuel like gasoline or
Right.
propane or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, and basically the way it works is that on takeoff and landing they use electric energy, but then when they're actually up in the upper
Yeah.
atmosphere. Then they use their jet, the jet engine with fossil fuel energy to really just go as fast as they can to get to the destination.
Hmm.
So that's one way to, minimize carbon footprint. Another way
Yep.
that I've heard proposed is biofuel. So
Okay.
if we already have thousands of cows producing cow dung, why not just use that dung for our planes? Because, it's got to go
Yeah.
somewhere anyways. And, same
Yeah.
thing with other types of biofuels.
Mm. Yeah, I mean there's so many up and coming areas in the energy space that surely, at some point it's just going to be economically infeasible to use fossil fuels. Um, and the upside to that too is it's better for the
Right.
environment. So that might be electric, that might be some insane source that we haven't, heard of.
And the
Um,
price of fossil fuels is expected to double over the next 20 years.
yeah, well, good. I hope it
Yeah.
does. um, but yeah, I mean, if we can, because one of the things that I'm hoping for with uh, cleaner energy is there are just more frequent plane, there are more frequent flights anywhere in the world. And they don't cost as much because it doesn't cost as much for the airline to make these giant flights.
Totally.
Um, and so what I envision at some point is, and maybe this is getting into a best case vision for me. So sorry if I repeat something later, but if there's a sort of system where the logistics that we talked about are so fine tuned that you basically just walk into an airport and then you can get on an airplane. Maybe if the energy efficiency catches up to this, so the cost of being on airplanes and the cost of running airplanes is relatively small, then you can almost treat airplanes like buses. Like if like oh, there's a plane today leaving at every 30 minutes going to LA or
Right.
going to London. Let's just get on that plane. Let's catch the 2:30 plane to London. And you can sort of
Yeah.
treat it that way.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of gets back to what we talked about in the future of transportation, where,
Uh-huh.
if you imagine a situation where every car is a self-driving car and it can all be managed from one central location, then you can
Mm-hmm.
have these cars just going, at all times, bumper to
Mm-hmm.
bumper, no collisions. It'll be super streamlined. And the analogy we used in that episode was the circulatory system, right? I mean, if you
Yeah.
think about how your body propagates blood to all of the different parts of your body,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't do it in like big clots of blood that go out every once in a while. Like that would be a very
Yeah.
inefficient way. Instead, it's pumping out small little pods of blood every second, every
Mm-hmm.
heartbeat's going out. So you could imagine a situation just like you said, where you go to an airport and because everything is fully automated and it's been queued up to the T,
Mm-hmm.
every 30 minutes or every 15 minutes there's a new flight going from LA to San Francisco or LA to New York or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And so you can just, hop on whatever one makes the most sense.
Yep. Yeah, I mean that just logistically that makes a lot of sense. The one thing that I would hope doesn't happen, I hope we can reduce the noise of planes first, because
Yes,
if we have
yes.
like all that noise, if we increase the amount of planes in the sky by like 10x.
Well, that's interesting you say that because when I was researching the hybrid planes, they would go electric for takeoff and landing, but they would also go electric when they're going over a city for that exact reason. So it would be more quiet over cities
Okay.
because electric planes make basically no noise. So
Okay.
you could set it up in such a way where whenever you're going over an urban center, you just you switch to electric.
Hmm. Okay. That makes a lot of sense then. And I hope something that, I think being an electric or having electric airplanes or at least having hybrid airplanes, like you said, is probably a prerequisite to this, 10, 20, 100xing the amount of planes in the sky.
Right. Now there are also solar powered unmanned aerial vehicles that exist today.
They're
So
really small, right?
they're really small, so you can't be a passenger in one of these things yet. But the cool thing about them is they never have to land. They literally take their energy from the sun, and they can just fly basically forever. I mean, something may go wrong that eventually they need to be serviced,
Yeah, they run
but
into a hurricane or something.
yeah, but it's pretty incredible that these things can fly around, take power from the sun, and just do their thing without any input. And typically, these solar powered UAVs are used for surveillance. So they'll fly very high up above whatever countries we're trying to keep tabs on, and just record bird's eye view of that, and
Hmm.
whatever um, ultraviolet light or
Yeah, yeah,
thermo
yeah.
sensors or whatever they're using. And that's a great way for us to keep tabs on the world. But yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, it's feasible that one day we could have solar powered planes. Maybe it doesn't seem possible today, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that can happen in 100 years that, something will probably happen to make something like that feasible.
Yeah. Well, have you heard about Amazon's like air fleet plan, or
No,
their
what?
mother, or
So,
like the mothership? So basically, Amazon has this plan to fly gigantic, zeppelins, big balloons that are
okay,
basically the Amazon mothership that will be in different areas. So you could imagine like you have one right outside the Coliseum in Los Angeles, right during a football game, let's say. And
okay.
you have this giant thing up there, and it stores all of the things that people would typically buy during the game. So you can literally order food or drinks or whatever you want, merchandise, of your favorite team's hats, whatever. You could order it from your phone, and then these little mini drones come out of the mothership carrying your package and deliver it right to you in your seat. And Bezos has plans to basically have these flying around like everywhere, so that you could have anything delivered within 15 minutes, like basically anywhere, as long as it's near one of these motherships.
Wow. I don't even know how I feel about that, but from from a first perspective, but so, on first glance that seems like overkill, to have that much. But
Yeah,
at the same time, that would be really cool to, if you needed something, if you were in a dire situation and you needed this thing right away, then that would be awesome. As long as it wasn't, something super disruptive. That
right.
would be my only concern with something like that. But I mean, that's kind of my concern with the planes too, is just as long as they can be relatively unseen and
Yeah,
unheard,
yeah.
which is kind of a theme that we talk about. Like technology
Right.
should be good enough that we don't see it.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's interesting.
So I want to touch on a couple other innovations in commercial air travel before getting into military, because there's some cool stuff in the military sector. Um,
Okay.
but anyways, I want to talk a little bit about the in-flight experience. We already touched on it a little bit. We talked about pods instead of regular seats that only go back 2 inches, and there's screaming babies right next to you, and fat guys stealing all the space on the armrest, and all that horrible experience. Another thing that's a cool innovation are windowless planes, and these are already being developed. And basically, the way it works is there's no windows, but they have cameras on the sides of the plane, and they project the outside video image to the
Hmm.
inside of the plane. So essentially, all of the walls are windows, quote unquote, where you can see outside. And I
Uh,
mean, this is just visually stunning when you see the concept images.
uh,
Um, so that's a very cool way to just make planes feel a lot more magical when you're in them, flying that high above.
yeah. I mean, there's so many good views from that, and it's always annoying when you can't really see out the window. So, and especially if so I was in the southern hemisphere, and for whatever reason, at least where I was, the lights or the stars in the sky were seemingly 10 times brighter than
Wow.
in the northern hemisphere. This was from a trip back from New Zealand, but they, I mean, I saw basically it seemed like the center of the Milky Way galaxy. Like I could see
Wow.
everything that you see in those pictures where you see the kind of the cloud of galaxies. But being able to just see that projected on the entire plane, because I was like huddled up over one of the little windows with a blanket covering, so no light could, reflect off the window. But if that was in the whole airplane, that would have been amazing.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, bringing back the magic to air travel because it is such an incredible experience. I think that would
Uh-huh.
would go a long way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And then, just other issues that people tend to have, I know one thing I'm worried about a lot on planes is sanitation. Like,
Yeah.
sticking your hand into that front, backseat pocket where every germ imaginable from every corner of the earth is just festering, waiting for you. So I could imagine situations where they greatly improve that sanitation,
Mm.
especially if they had more like private seating or, like we had talked about where the pods just load into. That would give the crew more time to actually clean these things out rather than just like shuffle people right back in.
Right. Yeah,
Um,
and the other thing too to think about in terms of like health is all the radiation you're exposed to when you're
yes.
flying all the time. So if there's, I think at some point, hopefully people can, or scientists can develop something to maybe go over the top or kind of fit around the capsule of the plane and protect, everyone, and especially the
Yeah.
pilots, because the pilots are up there a lot.
Oh,
And
yeah. The
I think they
pilots and the
have
flight
abnormally
attendants.
high, yeah, they all have abnormally high rates of cancer and
Oh,
other
yeah.
things.
Especially
Um,
pregnant mothers are really
yeah.
exposed to that. So,
Hmm.
yeah, radiation exposure. The other big issue is, especially with older passengers, they'll get blood clots, especially in their
Oh,
ankles,
yeah.
because
Yeah.
the ergonomics are so bad and there's so little space for them to move their legs that, they just get these blood clots in their ankles. It all drains down there. And then they'll have a
Hmm.
heart attack, maybe they'll have a stroke, and that's it. And I have actually heard stories about, people who have waited their whole lives saving up all their money so that they can finally travel the world. And then when they finally went and did it, on the
Yeah.
first flight, they just died. And
Oh, wow.
so the way to solve that, first, aside from just making the seats better so you actually have room to stretch out your
Uh-huh.
legs, is health monitoring. And
Okay.
this is something that's also been proposed where you can imagine, like, for instance, when you have your arms in the armrest, it can assess your health, your heartbeat
Yeah.
patterns, and there are other more deep health tech things
Yeah.
we could do. But that's a big challenge as well for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree because there definitely are a lot of health drawbacks to flying a lot. So it would be really good if we could, especially if there was some sort of AI doctor, medical care, robots that could help in case of an emergency if there's no doctor on board.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. They could easily partner up with One Medical or any of these companies
yeah.
that do that.
Hmm.
Um,
I'm curious to know your thoughts on the military stuff too, unless you had something else
yeah.
about
Well, I just want to
this.
say one other thing on commercial, and
Hmm.
that is well, actually I guess this is relating to any sort of aircraft. It's not just commercial,
Hmm.
but there's one trend that very few people are talking about that I find fascinating, which
Hmm.
is how the jet streams are changing as a result of climate change.
Oh yeah.
So, for those who don't know, if you travel, let's say from LA to New York, the plane will actually fly north up to the northern part of the United States so that it can take advantage of the jet stream. And what the jet stream is it's this um, current of air that
Hmm.
moves across the top part of North America and
Hmm.
swirls around the earth. And this is essentially what creates, weather patterns. And
Yeah.
so when planes are flying with the jet stream, they'll purposefully go towards it so they can have a faster flight. That's,
Yep.
but if they're coming back, like let's say you're coming back from New York to LA, they'll fly south to avoid the jet stream. And one thing that's been people have been noticing as a result of climate change is that the jet stream is getting much more powerful. And
Uh,
basically, the more that there is a disparity in between the temperatures of the poles, the
hmm.
faster this jet stream tends to move. And so, for instance, one of my friends said that his last flight from LA to New York was a full hour less than it was, has ever been when he's ever traveled in the past.
Wow.
And likewise, coming back is about a full hour longer than it's ever been in the past. Now, this isn't always the case. It depends on the weather
Mhm.
of the given day. But as a broad trend, the jet streams are getting more powerful. And so that is going to lead to faster flight times when you're traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast, and
Mhm.
slower flight times when you're traveling from the East Coast to the West Coast.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I imagine if it gets more and more powerful, everything is just going, the routes of planes are going to completely change also. I mean, I don't foresee this happening, but if you had a really long flight that was almost halfway around the world, but it was into the jet stream, it might be better off going the other way around the world, even though
Right.
you go over halfway. That's really interesting though. I hadn't heard of that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's why it would be great if everything was centrally controlled, like across countries. And they already kind of do this. I mean, they talk to one another, but,
Yeah,
it would be
planes are
really,
a little better than a lot of, or that
yeah,
aviation is a lot better than a lot of industries.
right.
But
Yeah. So, anyways, getting into the military and private sector stuff.
mm,
So, I'll start with SpaceX because SpaceX is
okay,
awesome.
yep.
And so, SpaceX has this plan to launch a BFR, which Elon Musk calls big fucking rocket. And the idea is that this ginormous rocket can take people all the way across from New York to Shanghai in 39 minutes.
Jesus.
And the way this thing works is that you get into the rocket, it shoots you out of the atmosphere with the full,
Hmm.
rocket power all the way out of the atmosphere. You have this intense, like 3x your mass is like pushing against you as you're
Uh,
escaping the Earth's atmosphere. So you're literally glued to your seat. Some people throw up. Some people think it feels amazing, like butterflies in their stomach. So it's not for everyone.
yeah.
But then after those first couple minutes, boom, weightlessness. You look out your window, you see outer space. You see the moon like you've never seen it. You see blue Mother Earth beneath you. And 39 minutes later, or 30 minutes later, whatever, you re-enter Earth's atmosphere, have another super intense experience where you're pushed to the back of your seat. You're feeling those butterflies, and then you land safely. And, this is obviously not for everyone,
Uh,
but it's a cool option. Like, if there was some serious emergency, like, let's say, we know a nuclear bomb is coming for us and we need to evacuate top White House officials, or,
uh,
or if it's just someone who wants to have a unique experience, or,
mm,
really wealthy businessmen or whatever it is. It's a cool option, and it kind of shows that the future of aviation really is space in a lot of
yeah.
ways.
Yeah, I agree. And especially if you think about these extreme long-term flights or space flights that are going to take place between one here in Mars and then two to potentially other solar systems. I think was it Alpha Centauri that's the next closest solar
Yep.
system? Um, we're going to have basically people living on these planes essentially, or these rockets essentially. So, then we need to talk about the whole next level of in-flight experience
Yeah,
because they're
yeah.
literally living on board for potentially several years or maybe even like
I would say it takes a
decades.
year to get to Mars and takes a year to get back, and it probably takes you a while to build your actual
Hmm.
civilization. So yeah, I mean, it's got to be livable for a long time. Another thing that's kind of interesting about how this is all changing. So, when I was a kid, like 12 years old or whatever, I thought this stealth bomber was like the coolest plane. Like, you know what that looks like? It's got like
Yeah.
that V shape and it just looks
Yeah.
awesome. That is going to be totally obsolete in a few years. And the reason is that radar detection is getting so good that none
Hmm.
of these stealth planes can go undetected anymore. It's already a known fact that, China pretty much knows whenever we try to, you know, have some unidentified planes because they're looking at things from all angles, not just from the ground. They're also looking at it from space, which is above these stealth,
Yeah.
quote unquote, stealth planes. And radar
Yeah.
technology and machine learning systems and AI, they're just so much better that there's really no reason to create
Hmm.
stealth planes anymore.
Yeah.
Um, so I thought
I
that
mean,
was an
that's kind
interesting
of good.
trend.
I mean, it's good that everyone kind of knows what everyone's up to. Then it makes starting wars harder and false, like really quick attacks harder.
Right.
Um, which, I guess there's more surveillance, but if it's kind of like the Cold War where if, one side
Yeah.
can't take action on the other side because it's mutually assured destruction, if that's what ensures the peace, you know, I don't really know exactly how I feel about that, but it's definitely interesting to think about how good that stuff is getting these days.
Right. Right. Yeah, so another metric that people will typically think about with like what are the coolest military planes. So we already did like stealth planes. The
Hmm.
fastest plane ever is also something people like to talk about.
Yeah.
And so the fastest plane currently that you can actually put a human in and it's not like a spacecraft
Right.
is the North American X-15. And this plane can go way faster than the speed of sound, which, for those who don't know, if it's like Mach whatever, that means it's like faster than the speed of sound.
Yeah. Mach 1 means the
Mach
speed of
Mach 1
sound.
is the speed of sound, Mach
Mach
2
2
is
is two times the speed of sound,
right.
and
So I
so on.
believe this is Mach 3 or Mach 4. So
Wow.
it's quite fast.
So like 2,100 miles per hour. It's about 700 miles per hour, I believe, for speed of sound.
Yeah, I mean
Uh,
this thing can
wow.
seriously move. And my first question when I heard about this is, well, why don't we just make airplanes that can travel that fast? Which may have been a dumb question, but I guess there's a couple of reasons. One is it's not that economical to use that much fuel to make it go that fast. It's like not really worth it from an ROI perspective for airlines. But another thing is that whenever a plane goes beyond the speed of sound, there's a sonic boom that occurs. And this is not something you want in your local neighborhood to happen frequently.
Yeah.
But an interesting development that's happening with the world's fastest planes is they're now finding ways to go beyond the speed of sound without a sonic boom. So it's not quite there yet, but they're finding ways to like I don't know how they do it, but
Do they might like manipulate the sound waves in front of the plane or something? I don't know. That's really interesting.
yeah, I need to dig deeper into it, but they're finding ways to go in fly in a smooth enough manner that you don't create a sonic boom, but you still achieve those supersonic speeds.
Wow. What, so did the Concorde ever achieve it was beyond the speed of sound, correct? This was the plane, the commercial plane like back in the 90s, I think, and maybe early 2000s that got decommissioned because it was pretty dangerous relative to other um and I think also the sonic boom potentially.
Yeah, the Concorde
Um
was Mach 2 and it could fit 92 like about 100 passengers.
okay.
Um, yeah, it flew for 27 years and then I don't know why they took it down.
I think they had like a couple of really serious crashes. Maybe
Right,
maybe
right.
maybe it was something else, but at least my is from what I recall, it was crash
Apparently
related.
they cited low passenger numbers, slump in air travel following September 11th, and rising manufacturer costs. Um,
Oh, I didn't realize there. Oh, I guess
I
okay.
mean,
There
that's
was
what they said.
passenger.
Who knows what the
Yeah.
real reasons are?
Hmm.
Yeah, but this is all showing us that it is possible to go supersonic. It's not something that they offer today, but it is something that we could potentially figure out in the future.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, and I think there are companies working on Concorde number two. I couldn't find the name of this company, but I remember reading about it a few months back. Um, but we might even have like Concorde V2 at some point in the future, especially with a more global economy from a couple decades ago. It might actually be economically feasible at this point.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and then the other metrics. So you got the fastest plane, the stealthiest plane, and then the most deadly plane
Hmm.
is obviously just whatever bomb it happens to be carrying. That an H bomb is
Right.
currently the
Yeah.
greatest. So that kind of goes without saying, but it's also terrifying, and it shows why
Hmm.
the Air Force is still so important today.
Oh yeah.
Because if push comes to shove, we do need someone to go fly that over there, or at least
Hmm.
to pilot the drone to go over there.
Right.
Um, yeah, and then I guess one other thing before we get into the future scenarios, we should talk a little more about the Air Max crash and why it's a problem and what it sort of shows that might be a bigger problem with the industry.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Air Max, the reason that it had crashed twice now was because they had implemented new software that self adjusted the position of the nose of the plane relative to the sensors that measured the air coming on top and below the wings. And there was a bug in this system so that basically, when the pilot was trying to bring this plane up, the system would push it down. And this up and down momentum would keep happening over and over again. And that's how they realized that a bug caused this crash. Because they looked in the black box, they saw that it was the same exact type of behavior as in the previous crash. And that's
Hmm.
why they ended up recalling all of these Air Max planes. Now, the reason I find this interesting is because it shows that we're in this sort of middle transition period between having fully manual planes and fully autonomous planes, where
Yeah.
it's now like it's literally a human fighting against the machine to fly you to where you need to go. And
Uh,
so I actually think it's going to be much safer once we go fully autonomous because you're not going to have this back and forth.
mhm.
Um, However, that also opens it up to the plane being hacked, especially if there's a notable or influential person on board. You can imagine certain organizations spending a lot of effort to be able to hack that particular plane at that particular day.
Mhm.
So that's a concern.
Yeah. I mean, so in terms of autonomous vehicles, I don't know the nature of the software that's running these planes, but I would imagine that it's not what we think of as artificial intelligence or machine learning, where it's kind of a black box algorithm. I imagine that the software has very specific rules. Like if we have this input, then we need to do exactly this, and that's specified by people. And
Right.
that sort of AI system and that sort of control system tends not to work in really dynamic environments where things are changing all the time. So you know, I would hope that the AIs and the software that it's running and driving and controlling planes is more a learned thing. So it learns what to do, sort of like
Right.
how Tesla does. Tesla doesn't go in and hard code. If you're if you see this octagon, you stop. A red octagon, you stop,
Right.
or
Right.
an upside down triangle, you yield. Like there are these there's just better ways to do it, and I would imagine that in the future it's going to be more AI driven than just
Mm.
rules based, like it probably was there, which is hopefully going to be more prone to attacks like, I mean, hacking. There are I mean, there are ways to hack sort of system AI systems, but it's a lot less straightforward because you
Mm,
need to somehow give the system input that makes it behave in some predetermined way that it's hard to actually determine what that way is because it is a
right.
black box.
Especially if there's, millions and millions of miles trained on this system,
Uh-huh.
you'd have to input a lot of bunk data to get
Yeah.
to a conclusion like a crash.
Hmm.
So I think you're right, and it does sound like they've hard coded the software because they said that, oh, it wasn't receiving the appropriate sensor information. But if this was a machine learning model, it would know that, hey, when you're taking off, don't turn the nose down. like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
just rely on the sensors. Have some other,
Yeah.
fallbacks.
Hmm.
Yeah, so
And
I'm with you. Well, I think that's a good place to take a quick break and then get into the worst case, best case, and most likely future scenarios. All right, let's get into the worst case scenario.
Worst case scenario.
So, Justin, what do you think is the worst case scenario for the future of aviation?
yeah, so my worst case focuses on the environmental impact of air travel. So what I was thinking is that the so over the next, let's say, 20, 30 years, air travel doesn't get as clean as we hoped. Like it still burns a lot of fossil fuels. And so you told me about a statistic the other day. Was it something like one seat on a single plane? If you buy one
Yeah.
seat, it's like 80,000 miles or
No,
something
so it's
driving in a
so
car.
it's yeah, so it's one seat on one flight is the equivalent of 8 months worth of driving as far as how much fuel you're using.
Wow. Yeah. So
So it's a massive footprint.
it's and that's kind of what inspired this because I think the pace of technology for all these different things that we've been talking about are not going to go at the same speed. I
Hmm.
think people will get the lowest hanging fruit first, which is probably not going to be alternative energy sources for planes. What I imagine will happen is we see a huge spike in flight traffic. So we're going to have a lot more planes, but still using the same dirty electricity or the same dirty energy. Um, and that's kind of the worst case is we just, drastically increase the pollution from planes
Yeah.
and it just exaggerates all of the issues we're seeing now. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, that's basically it. And in addition to all of that, the noise pollution from planes, especially flying over forests and other areas like that can disrupt the wildlife there. Um, so yeah, that's kind of my worst case.
Yeah, so I definitely hear you on the environmental stuff. I think that's a big challenge. It
Hmm.
also brings to mind an Elon Musk quote where he said that having a bunch of things flying around over your head is not exactly an anxiety reducing
Yeah.
experience.
Uh-huh.
So even just from like a normal quality of life, not even thinking about the environment, having
Hmm.
all these planes above you all the time, it creates a lot of noise, it creates visual pollution, and it creates safety concerns if one of these planes comes down on your head.
Hmm.
That's not a good thing. So I actually, as far as transportation, I would be very sparing in use of planes. I
Yeah.
think I'd be much more receptive to, drones and small aircrafts that, especially if they're solar powered and really, or electric or quiet, like delivery drones. I don't have a big problem with that,
Yeah.
but I do have a problem with things that are, big and noisy and potentially
Yeah.
unsafe. So that's my worst case for the environmental side. As
Yeah.
far as just the social aspect of it, I really see the trends of air travel as potentially going the route of Big Brother. We saw a little bit of that with how China uses facial recognition to track every single person. It's all great. Like, who doesn't want to have a more efficient, personalized experience going to the airport that's just for them, so long as you trust the government, right? If you don't
Yep.
trust the government, then having them track you every which way and being able to control where you go, which countries you're allowed to go to, using data mining to see your travel patterns and flagging you when maybe you shouldn't be flagged, and all of these sort of surveillance, privacy concerns, that could really go in a bad direction if we're not careful. So that's my worst case scenario.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with that also. What do you think for the best case?
Best case scenario.
So the best case scenario is the funny thing is that it's pretty similar to the worst case technology wise, because I think the technology is going to get way better regardless.
Uh-huh.
The difference is that there's a good government in place, so it actually has the right incentives and the right intentions. But yeah, I mean, my ideal scenario for air travel would be a situation where you hail a self-driving car to come to your door. It takes you right to the airport. They've already screened you completely because you've done the clear background check or whatever. They don't have to do it again. So you literally just walk right to your gate, and if you have to put your luggage through, they are already developing CT scanners that would make it so you don't have to take out anything. You don't have to take out your laptop. You don't have to take out toiletries, anything, because it can scan it. It creates a 3D model so you can see it from all angles, and it also knows what types of materials are in there. So all you do is, you put your bag through, takes a second, you go to your gate, and you just sit in your little pod, whatever you're going to actually be sitting on in the airplane. You get nice and comfy, and then whenever your time for your flight is, that pod just lowers into the plane, and it just takes off. And then you get to your destination, the pod comes out, and then you just hail your self-driving Tesla, and it just takes you to your destination. So it removes all the friction of the current aviation paradigm, is my best case scenario.
Yeah, I like that a lot. So I had a couple of similar points. I also touched on this a little bit earlier.
Sure.
But the first thing is, the opposite of the environmental issues is that we do come up with a purely clean energy source for planes to run on. And they're also quiet. I think both of those things are key. But if we have that, then planes can be flying more frequently all over the place. So you can be boarding planes all the time. Like you have a plane that's leaving to London every hour, and the cost of this flight is so low, and maybe the people that are trying to get on can decide like that day if they want to take this flight over to London, or maybe it's so frequent that you can even commute from New York to London for work. It's just really good, really fast, really clean air travel. And all of this kind of makes the assumption that the security, the logistics, everything about the flight plan and the airport and all of that is locked down. But I just think with the movement towards a more global economy and everyone is a citizen of the world, like flying is important because we can go visit somewhere else. And right now, that's kind of the bottleneck in travel. Is if I want to visit China, or if I want to visit Singapore or something, somewhere in Asia, right now I'm not making that decision because I don't want to fly, and it's so expensive to just do it on a whim. But I'm hoping that in the best case, everything is just kind of locked down and quick and efficient, that we can do stuff like that, and anybody can do something like that.
Yeah. What do you think is the most likely scenario?
Most likely scenario.
So I think the likely scenario is eventually we do move towards the best case. Like you said, the technology is just going to keep getting better and better. It is just going to be economically um, irresponsible to stick to fossil fuels once the prices go, way too high. So even if you're not an environmentalist, you're just going to have to suck it up and, make an electric plane. Um, but I do think in the short term, we'll probably see some pretty drastic slow. I mean, I think we'll see an increased demand of plane rides,
Yeah.
but the logistics of the airports themselves, I don't see that improving for a vast majority of airports. I know there are some fairly good airports, but I think until we have sort of a global governance where people do have, or governments and whoever the governing body of this would be, has access to the information of the people getting on the planes, I think it's just gonna, I don't know, I think it'll be a sort of inefficient process the same way it is now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my most likely scenario is similar in that, I mean, if you look at the broad trends, more people are flying each year, so the demand is going up. The cost of travel is getting cheaper over time. And a lot of what that vectors towards is a very low cost, low happiness experience. It's like a lot of people,
Yeah.
think of like Southwest Airlines or, you know,
Yeah.
or Ryanair is even worse. I mean, and if you also look at another chart that I think is fascinating, is this chart that measures the price of airline and then with the price with fees. So with all of these add-ons.
Okay.
And the two, up until the last, 10 years, the prices were exactly the same. They didn't have all these hidden fees. But there are more and more airlines that are creating a bigger disparity between the price you see online and the price that actually gets charged on your card. And a lot of this is sort of penalizing people who want to get the lowest cost air travel. So if you're someone who's looking at Skyscanner or Expedia or whatever your site of choice is, and your mindset is what is the lowest price possible, you're going to have a terrible experience, and you're probably going to end up paying a very similar price to what the other options are. So I think there is going to be this sort of tiered system of, if you signal to the AI that you're someone who just cares about cost, you're going to get nickel and dime from a million directions, whereas, or, added fees. I guess that's the opposite of nickel and diming. But, or if you're someone who signals that you're willing to pay a little bit more, you're going to get treated way better. So this sort of two-tiered system, I think, is going to be a trend. Another trend is that there has pretty much been a duopoly between Boeing and Airbus. And I think this duopoly is going to break. Not in the next 10 years, but probably in the next 20 or 30 years, via the Chinese state-owned airline of, I forget what it's called, Comac or something like that.
Yeah, I'm not
Um,
sure.
yeah, but I think that actually will be really good for competition because it'll make, Comac's, the Chinese airline was developed like in the last 10 years, whereas these Boeings and Airbus, they literally haven't changed their designs since like the 1960s. It's pretty incredible. I mean, yeah, they still work, but there hasn't been a whole lot of innovation because it's a duopoly. So
Right.
I think there's going to be greater competition, but that also, leads to concerns of, how much influence China has and how they deal with surveillance and different citizens. And so there's a lot of concerns there, but overall, I think it's going to vector towards
We
a
are all
better
gathered here
experience for
today to talk
everyone.
about three
Sounds
very
good. I
important
like it.
things.
All right. Well, I
We're
think
gonna
that's a
talk
good place
about
to end
what
it.
has
This
happened,
has been
what
the
is
Future
currently
of
happening,
Aviation.
and what will
Thank you all
inevitably
for
happen.
listening.
The past, the present, and the